Hello there everybody. So in this little exercise we're going to be looking at how to use our watercolour paints which are in our packs, okay? And so what we'll need to do this is we're going to need some clean water, we're going to need our watercolour paints, we're going to need some oil pastels, pencil, and there should be some paintbrushes in your pack. So I've picked out a nice fat nibbed paintbrush and a thin one, a thin bristled one for doing detailed work as well. Now if you look at the piece of paper in front of us here, I've went through a list of techniques which we've all used before, but just a recap to remind us how to use the paint, okay? So you'll be able to see that I've got 8 distinct boxes for us to do our different techniques in, okay? So the first thing that you'll need to do is to get your watercolour paper. Now your watercolour paper's in your packs and it's the thick green paper. It's quite it's got a rough texture to it, and it really works well with taking in wet paint and wet ink, and it won't fall to pieces when you're using it. So first things first, you're going to take your masking tape which is in your pack, and we're going to put a cross in the middle of our page. Now I've got my first line of tape down, so I'll put a piece of tape from top to bottom and I've taped it to the middle of the page, okay? So the page is now stuck to the table. I'm going to take a second piece of tape and I'm going to put a cross through the middle like so. And that'll leave us with a cross. Now I'm going to put another piece of tape through the middle here, and this will give us another box. So we've got another rectangle there coming in. That's stuck down. I'm going to do the same on this side, so I've gone through the middle of this space which is left, create another box. There we go. And just to make sure that we get like a nice neat edge like we have on this one here, I'm going to run a little bit of tape along each of the edges as well, okay? So I'll do that now. So just a tiny little bit going over, and it'll help keep it secured to the table as well. Give us some nice little things to work on. Now in this exercise, we're going to be doing various different things, all stuff we've done before, nothing too complicated, but it's just a way to get us using our paints again and remembering how they work, what little techniques we can use with the watercolours to get different effects. And Katie will be showing you later on in another video different things that we can do once we've recapped on all these techniques. So just a nice way of getting back into using the paints again, and how they work, how you can manipulate them to do different things. Okay, so if we have a look on here, so we're going to go left to right and then across the bottom as well. So our first technique, we're going to do a wet wash onto wet paper. Now that's pretty self-explanatory, I think. So a wet wash onto wet paper. So this technique here, it kind of replicates what water can look like on a piece of paper. If you look, there's dark areas and there's light areas. It's the basic standard way of using a watercolour paint. So the first thing that we do is we get a big fat brush and we dip it into some water like so, and we're just going to wet all over our first box here. We don't need pools and pools of water, but just enough so that the paper is wet, and we're able to then transfer the paint from our tin on there. Now I said it can replicate water a bit, this one, so I think I'm going to pick a nice blue colour to paint with. So I'm going to take my watercolour paints, place them down there, and I'm going to go into the blue here. I'm just going to load and brush up some of that paint. So remember, with the watercolours, you'll get them out your packs and they'll be dry. So in order to release the colour and the pigment from the paints, you need to wet them, and then we can just keep adding water to them and you'll get a nice little mix of paint there going, okay? So I'm just going to paint this paint into there, and you see already as soon as I put my first touch down, that paint is bleeding all into the water which is on top of the paper. Okay, so you'll end up with dark areas if you just do little bits like that, or you can get light areas, and the paint will find its own way to move around because it's so wet. There we go. So you can see you're getting little dark light areas appearing. If I put a dark bit in like that, it'll start bleeding round. So that's our first thing that we're going to do. So there we go, we can let that dry. And I mean, this is a good way of making a background if you want to do a drawing or something on top of it, and you think, oh, I haven't got any blue paper, but I'd really love to do a nice drawing on some blue. We can watercolour it, and then that can dry, and then you can draw on top of it. Okay, so our next thing which we're going to do is a flat wash on dry paper. Now we're going to go into our second box here. Okay, so I used blue that time, and I think this time I'm going to use a red. Okay, so on the first technique, we wet the paper first. Okay, on this one, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use dry paper because if you wet the paper, all your colour will bleed. However, we want a solid block of colour. So I'm going to let the pigment from here work as well as it can to colour the page. So I'm just dipping into my red. So again, onto dry paper. I'm just slowly. What I want here is an even spread of colour all around the page, okay? So it'll be one block colour of red. Okay, so I'll add a little bit more of that into there. So again, when I was talking about creating backgrounds to draw on or paint on, this is a good way of doing that, for just making one simple, and it's really quick and easy to do. Look how quickly have I made that. One solid box of colour, just like that. Okay, so it's 2 boxes filled with 2 simple techniques of learning how to use the watercolours again. So I'm going to go on to the third one now. So on this one, if you look on my example, we've got it's called a gradated wash. Now that's a big long word, but basically what it means is we're going from dark at the top of the page down to almost white at the bottom of the page. So what we're doing is working on how we can use the paint. So if you look, it's reminiscent to me of like a sky, you know, or a nighttime scene where you could put like a silhouette or something on the background of there, and you'd have a really nice looking sky. So this is just the way that we'll go about making that. So basically we're going to wet our paper again. So I'm going to dip into some clean water this time, clean water, and like we did in the first box, I'm just going to wet, oops, no, that's not totally clean, is just wet the page, so we'll get it nice and wet on there. And then I'm going to dip into a colour, and I think I will go for a nice bright purple this time. So I'm going to dip into this colour here. I really want to load this colour up on my brush, because it's really important that you get a lot of colour and a lot of pigment into this for the first one. And I'm just going to take that over the top. I'm going left to right. I'm just going to keep working along. And as I'm going down, the pigment is bleeding onto the paper, and there's less and less colour on my brush. So eventually, I'll get to the bottom. There should be hardly any colour at all. Once that dries, you'll get really nice technique out of that. So I mean, you can work some more colour into the top if you like. So we get a really dark area at the top. So I'll just keep adding my blue, because I really want to show that it's really dark at the top going into the light. So we're getting a gradual change in the colour as we're going down. Okay, there we go. So that's that technique there. Now obviously the nice thing about watercolours is that the water will go wherever you want, but we can do things that stop the water spreading everywhere, and that's called creating a resist. So in my example piece, I've done a simple drawing of some stars, and what I've used to draw the stars are my oil wax crayons. Now the oil wax is like a candle wax. If you ever drip it on anything, you'll find that water won't sit on top of it because it creates a resist. So we're going to use that principle to draw something, and then when we paint our watercolour over the top of it, we'll have created a resist, so the colour really stands out. Lovely bold vibrant yellow. So I'm going to do that now. So I'm just going to quickly draw some stars in here, I think. So I'm just going to go like that. And you can colour these in if you like. You can have different sized ones. So I'm going to go like that. I'm just going to colour in. I'm going to pop another one down here. I might do it like a little moon shape as well. Although on the yellow it looks a bit like a banana, but let's not worry about that. Okay, so I'm going to do a background colour for this now. So again, I'm going to clean my brush off. I'm going to dip into some of my paints. So I'm going to use a bit of a blue colour again. I want it quite a light wash of this, so I'm going to add loads of water into my paint pot, and then it's quite apparent what's going to happen here. So as soon as I paint on here, you'll see that where I put the oil pastel, it's not going to do anything to the drawing, but it is, however, going to resist it. So you could draw all kinds of things with these oil pastels. Anything you wanted, leaves, faces, people, animals, whatever it is, whatever you'd like to do. And it won't pick up the colour on the place where you put the oil. So we get that resist, and it's a really nice technique to use when we're using these. So differentiate your drawing from the paint which we're applying to it. So it's a really nice little technique. So we're going to follow on from that one. So that's our fourth box already. It's really quick. That's the nice thing about watercolours, you can do lots of things really quickly. So we're going to follow on from what we just did with the resists, but rather than just using a basic wash colour over the back of it, we are now going to create shapes, and we're going to fill in the shapes, and we're going to use the wax as a resist, as a barrier. A bit like when you're doing batik or something like that. So the barrier stops the colour merging into the other colours, okay? So I'm going to take my blue, what's the blue in this? I'm just going to draw some leaves. So I'm going to go. I'm going to do another small one here. I want that not to touch. I'm going to put another one in here as well. Okay, we've got our leaves here. So this time I'm going to clean that brush off again, try and not get any colour mixed up. I'm going to alternate my colours in the leaves, okay? So this is just an example of how we can form the barrier and stop the colours blending into each other. So I'm going to take this yellowy green colour on my brush, okay? I'm just going to paint this leaf here. So I'm being quite careful not to go over the outside, not to go over the edge where I've created the resist. So I'm going to do that one, and then I'm going to alternate. So I'm going to do this leaf here. I'm going to jump onto this one. I'll maybe do this one in the middle this time, in a yellowy green colour, and go down to here, do that there, okay. Do the same down here. Notice I don't need to put loads of water onto my brush, I don't need to load up with loads of paint, because it's all sat in the brush, so you don't have to go wild with the colour. So I'm going to clean that off a little bit again. And this time I'm going to pick this nice reddy colour which I have here. So again, exactly the same technique. So I'm just painting quite carefully in between the lines, try not to blur over so my colours not blending into each other. And I'm just going to paint in this nice vibrant red colour. And so I'm just working into the leaves which I haven't already coloured. Gently painting in there. You can see how the oil pastels have created that nice barrier, so the colour isn't bleeding into one another like it was in these. I'm going to clean that off, and I think I'm going to put a little bit of green in for a background colour on this. So again, using my fat brush, same brush I've used on all of it. I'm just going to colour in the background, being careful not to blend the colours in, not to go over my lines so my colours bleed, okay? So it's all about keeping the resist, and we keep our separation of colours. It doesn't, I mean, I've done a little bit there, so it may happen, so don't get too precious about it. But it's nice to learn how to use the paints again in a way which can keep our colour separation. So I'm just filling in all the white spaces. When I finish this painting, there should be no white space left at all. It should all be coloured in. Very simple, very quick and easy. There we go. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different techniques there, which you can use. All very simple, all easy to use. So our next painting, I'm going to draw another leaf this time, okay? So if we have a look on here, I have a leaf, okay? So on this one, when we did these leaves, we used the oil pastel as a relief, okay? So this time I'm going to draw my leaf using my pencil, and we're going to paint in a little bit of a different way. So rather than really loading the brush up with lots and lots of wet paint, I'm going to use it's called Drybrush technique basically, and it's kind of in the title what that's about. So it's about using the paint in a more dry way, and it gives you better control over how the colours bleed together and interact together. So this time I'm taking my thin brush, okay, and I'm going to start off by, as it's a thin brush, you won't pick up loads of paint anyways, but I'm just going to take a bit of this. I'm just gently going to start painting around quite detailed with my little thin brush. It's really strong, nice colour. So I'm just going around the outside of my leaf. So obviously I didn't wet my paper beforehand, so it's not going to bleed everywhere. It should pretty much stay where you want it to go. Just colouring in the outside of my shape. That's where I dripped a bit of water. You see what happened there? It's all bled into each other, but it's quite nice, I don't mind that. Just doing that, so I've done the outside. I'm going to work it into the spine of the leaf now, so I'm just going to add a little bit of colour to that. Just going over the lines that I drew in with my pencil. Well, you don't have to do a leaf, you could do anything you wanted for this. I've just picked this as an example. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to swap my colour now. I'm going to take a bit of my lighter green, and I'm just going to colour in. So I'll clean that brush off a bit better. There we go. I'm just going to start adding little different bits of colour in. because we get that especially in autumn, that the leaves start changing colours. You might have 2 or 3 different types of colour, or hundreds of different types of colour in one leaf. So just a nice way. We get lots of browns and reds and different autumnal colours, so you could think about putting them in there as well. I'm just filling in space again, quite dry. I'm not wanting the colours to bleed together on this. Okay, so I'm trying to leave little bits of white space for myself to work into. Okay, so this time I'm going to take a bit of yellow. I think I'm going to add a bit of yellow to this. So just a little bit when I've got bits of space. I'm just going to start building up the colours. Trying not to touch the other colours so we don't get that bleed happening. I want it to be just solid blocks of colour. So I've got quite a bit going on there. I mean, this works as well if you allow the painting to dry and then work back into it. You can work some dry brush colour back on the top of it as well and really start layering up your colours like you would do with acrylics. There we go. Got a few little bits, a few little white spots going on as well, but that's quite nice in there. So now I'm going to take my large brush and I'm going to work some colour into the background. So I think it might be a bit of this brown colour, browny green. I'm going to work some of this in the background. So again, I've just loaded that brush up, and like we did before, just going to do a bit of a wash in the background. Fill the space in around it. Again, try not to touch the other areas of paint so we're not getting a big bleed of colour going on. I want it to look quite sharp. Just take your time on it. There we go. Okay, so if we go back to my original one here, there's 2 question marks on these ones, because like we've done in the other things, I would like you in these final 2 areas just to mix and match some of the techniques that we've been using. So maybe you could do some oil pastel resist with some dry brushing on there, or you could do an oil pastel resist like this and you could do a gradiated background on it. So just have a play around in these 2 boxes with the techniques that I've shown you, and just have a play about and see what you can come up with yourselves, okay? So there we go, lovely.